He made his bed every morning. He fed the neighbor's dog when they went on vacation. He got a B+ in science. He had a gap-toothed smile that his mother photographed obsessively, the way mothers do when they can feel time moving too fast. He was 12 years old, and somewhere between the soccer practice and the homework and the bowl of cereal, he had killed 3 people, and his parents had absolutely no idea. That is where our story begins. Welcome back, trackers. If you are new here, welcome to Uncanny Crime Stories, the show where we follow the evidence, honor the lost, and refuse to look away from the stories that the world would rather forget. I'm your host, and today we are going into one of the darkest, most psychologically complex cases I have ever had the displeasure of researching at 2 in the morning with all the lights on. We are going to Miami, Florida. We are going to a quiet suburb with good schools and friendly neighbors and a homeowners association that sends passive-aggressive emails about lawn height. We are going to a family that looked, by every measurable standard, completely normal. And we are going to reckon with a question that I still don't have a clean answer to, even after weeks inside this case. What do you do when the monster is your child? Alright, trackers, buckle in. Because tonight we are not just following a case. We are following the uncanny crime stories of the people who walked into the shadow of a 12-year-old boy and never walked back out. Let's start with the neighborhood because the neighborhood matters. Palmetto Shores. That's what we're calling it. A composite, fictional suburb in the greater Miami area, the kind of place that has a community pool, a Facebook group for lost cats, and exactly one Mexican restaurant that everyone swears is just as good as real Mexican food. It's the kind of neighborhood where people leave their garage doors open on Saturday mornings, where kids ride bikes without helmets and nobody calls anyone, where the phrase, "we don't really lock our doors," is said with a kind of quiet pride, like it's proof that they've built something good. And for most of the families in Palmetto Shores, they had built something good. The kind of good that takes years of mortgage payments and school district research and arguing about kitchen renovations to build. Now let me introduce you to some of those families. The Reyes family lived at the end of Crestwood Drive. Marco Reyes, 44, was a night shift supervisor at a pharmaceutical logistics warehouse. He worked hard. He was tired a lot. He coached his daughter's soccer team on weekends even when his back hurt, which was always. His wife, Diane, 39, did bookkeeping for 3 small businesses from a home office that smelled permanently of printer ink and lavender candles. They had 2 kids, 14-year-old Sophia, who was obsessed with marine biology and wanted to study shark, and their son. We're going to call him Daniel. That is not his real name. In this story, the child at the center of everything will be referred to only as Daniel. He was a real child. He was 12 years old, and out of the conflicting legal, ethical, and moral weight of this case, that's all the name he gets from us tonight. Now I want to be clear about something before we go any further, trackers. This is not a story that asks you to feel sorry for Daniel. It is not a redemption story. 3 people are dead. Their families are shattered. That is the gravitational center of this case always. But to understand how this happened, and maybe to understand how to stop it from happening again somewhere else, in some other quiet suburb with a community pool and a lost cat Facebook group, we have to understand Daniel. We have to go in. By every account, Daniel was a quiet kid. Not troubled quiet. Not alarm bells quiet. Just still. His 2nd grade teacher described him as self-contained. His 4th grade teacher said he was a pleasure to have in class, very focused. His soccer coach said he was coachable, good spatial awareness, didn't celebrate goals, just jogged back to position like it was a job. His mother Diane kept a journal which would later become one of the most devastating documents in this entire case, and in an entry from when Daniel was 9, she wrote something that made my chest tight when I read it. She wrote, "Danny looked at me today while I was crying during a movie. He didn't ask what was wrong. He didn't come over. He just watched me. Analytically, like he was taking note. I don't know why that made me feel more alone than if he'd left the room. She closed the entry by writing, "He's probably just going through a phase." She went to bed that night. She made him breakfast the next morning. She loved him. She loves him still. And she had absolutely no idea what was growing in the quiet behind his eyes. Before we go any further into Daniel, I need you to meet the people this story is really about. True crime has a problem. A real one. We get so seduced by the how and the why of the perpetrator that the victims become props in someone else's story. Names in a list. Faces in a thumbnail. That is not happening on this show. So stop. Slow down. Meet Victor Alanis. Victor was 51 years old. He had lived in Palmetto Shores for 22 years. He was a retired corrections officer who had pivoted somewhat unexpectedly into becoming a genuinely excellent gardener. His front yard was the nicest on the street. Not showily nice. Quietly, expertly nice. The kind of yard that makes other people walk past it slowly and feel something they can't name. Victor was a widower. His wife, Patricia, had passed from ovarian cancer in 2019. He had a daughter in Atlanta named Renee, who called him every Sunday at 7 p.m. Every single Sunday. She told investigators later that the Sunday he didn't answer, she called back 17 times before she called the police. 17 times. Victor Alanis was found in his backyard, near the garden bed he'd been tending. He had been struck from behind. He was the first. Angela Moss, 33, was the kind of person who made everywhere slightly better by being in it. She was a pharmacy technician. She volunteered at an animal shelter on alternating Saturdays. She had recently finally, after years of talking about it, enrolled in an online course to become a licensed counselor. Because she said, and I'm going to quote the people who knew her here, she always wanted to help people find their way back. She had a boyfriend named Terrence who had been planning to propose at Christmas. The ring was already purchased. He showed investigators the receipt still in his wallet, still folded up, like he couldn't bring himself to throw it away. Angela had been walking her dog, a golden retriever named Biscuit, the evening she disappeared. Biscuit came home alone. Angela was found 3 days later, in a drainage easement 2 blocks from her apartment. She was the second, and then there was Marcus Webb, 14 years old. Marcus was a kid. A 9th grader at Palmetto Shores Middle High. He played video games. He ate too much tacos. He was on the debate team, which his older brother teased him about endlessly, and which he was secretly very proud of. He had braces. He'd been complaining about them for 2 months. He would have gotten them off in April. Marcus had been riding his bike home from a friend's house on a Tuesday evening in October, a route he'd ridden probably 100 times. His parents, Darnell and Camille Webb, expected him home by 8. He never came home. Marcus Webb was found the following morning in a drainage canal. He was the third. He was 14 years old, and his killer was 12. I want to sit in that for just a second, trackers, because I think the instinct when you hear a number like 12 is to reach for explanation, to rush to the why, to find something that makes it make sense, and I understand that instinct. I had it too, but right now, right in this moment, I want us to resist it. Victor planted gardens. Angela wanted to help people find their way back. Marcus had braces he was going to get off in April. That's where we start. That's always where we start. Okay, I'm going to take 30 seconds to talk about today's sponsor, because even in the middle of the darkest story I've told on this show, I still need the lights on and the internet connected. Today's episode is brought to you by me and only me. Alright, lights back down. We're going back in. So, how do 3 people end up dead in a quiet suburb in Miami and nobody connects them to a 12-year-old boy for 6 weeks? That is the question that drove the lead detective on this case. We'll call her Detective Rosa Vargas, a 20-year veteran of the Miami-Dade Police Department, absolutely, certifiably, sleeplessly insane. Because here's the thing, trackers. On the surface, These 3 cases look like they have nothing to do with each other. Victor Alanis, retired corrections officer, older man, lived alone. Investigators initially suspect robbery. There's no forced entry, but Victor was known to leave his back gate open. Angela Moss, young woman, walking a dog at dusk. Investigators look immediately at the boyfriend, then at a registered sex offender who lived half a mile away. Neither pans out. Marcus Webb, teenage boy, bike riding after dark. The gang unit gets involved. The school gets involved. 3 different families get looked at. Nothing sticks. 3 different investigations. 3 different leads. 3 different dead ends. And all 3 crime scenes shared one thing that nobody noticed for 6 weeks. One thing. A partial shoe print. Not a full print. Not even half a print, really. Just the lateral edge of a sole, the outside edge of a right foot pressed into soft ground near each victim. Dirt near Victor's garden bed. Mud near Angela's drainage easement. A patch of soft grass near the canal where Marcus was found. Small. Very small. Size 4.5. Detective Vargas, on week 6, is reviewing physical evidence late at a desk covered in cold coffee cups, and she pulls up all 3 crime scene reports side by side, something no one had done yet because they were still treating them as separate cases. And she sees it. Same lateral edge, same tread pattern, same size, a size 4.5 shoe. She pulls up the database, cross-references the tread, a Nike Air Force 1 low, children's sizing. She later told a colleague, "My first thought was that it was a mistake. My second thought was that I was going to be sick." The investigation pivot. Immediately and entirely. Vargas starts working backward. Security cameras, witness accounts, timeline mapping. She's looking for any child, any small person who appears in the vicinity of all 3 crime scenes in the relevant windows. And here's where it gets, and I don't use this word lightly, extraordinary. Because Daniel had not been invisible. He'd been hiding in plain sight. 3 separate neighbors remembered seeing a kid on a bike near Victor Alanis's street the evening of the murder. They hadn't mentioned it because why would you? Kids ride bikes. That's what kids do. A gas station camera 2 blocks from where Angela Moss was found captured, at 7:43 p.m., a small figure in a gray hoodie on a bicycle, moving east. Face angled down. Hands in the right position. No hesitation. And a middle school classmate of Marcus Webb's interviewed only because she was the last person to text Marcus before he disappeared mentioned, almost as an aside, that she'd seen the Reyes kid on Marcus's street that afternoon. She said it the way you mention weather. Like it meant nothing. It meant everything. On a Wednesday morning in November, Detective Vargas drove to Crestwood Drive. She knocked on the door of the Reyes family home. Diane Reyes answered. Vargas later wrote in her notes that Diane was wearing a flour-dusted apron, that there was music playing in the kitchen, that the house smelled like someone had just baked something. She described Diane as warm, immediately warm, offered me coffee before I said a word. Vargas told her she was conducting a neighborhood canvass. Routine questions. She asked if she could speak to Daniel. And Diane Reyes, who loved her son, who journaled about him, who made him breakfast every morning, smiled and called up the stairs. "Danny, honey, there's someone here to talk to you." And he came downstairs, 12 years old, gap-toothed, still in his soccer uniform from practice. Vargas said later. He looked me in the eyes immediately. Most adults don't do that when a detective shows up at the door. He did. And he smiled. And my blood ran cold. The formal interview with Daniel happened 3 days later. By then, Vargas had a warrant for his shoes, a pair of Nike Air Force Ones found in his closet, size 4.5, and preliminary forensic analysis had found trace soil consistent with all 3 crime scenes on the soles. She also had something else. The formal interview with Daniel happened 3 days later. By then, Vargas had a warrant for his shoes, a pair of Nike Air Force Ones found in his closet, size 4.5, and preliminary forensic analysis had found trace soil consistent with all 3 crime scenes on the sols. She also had something else. She had Daniel's laptop. And on Daniel's laptop, behind 2 layers of password protection that a 12-year-old had built himself from watching YouTube tutorials, she found a folder. He had called it Projects. Inside that folder were 3 subfolders. One named V, one named A, one named M. Each folder contained a photograph taken from a distance of the victim, taken before the crime, a hand-drawn map of the location, a list written in a child's handwriting, neat and small, of what he described as entry and exit variables, times, routes, contingencies. He had planned them, all 3, with the methodical, unhurried patience of someone who had all the time in the world. Because in his mind he did. He was 12. He went to school. He fed the neighbor's dog. He came home for dinner. Nobody was looking for him. Marco Reyes was called out of his warehouse job at 11 p.m. He arrived at the station still in his uniform, still smelling like the industrial floor cleaner they used in the warehouse. He sat down across from Vargas, and she watched him process what she was telling him the way you watch someone's face when a building falls down behind them in a movie, that terrible, slow-motion collapse. He kept saying, no, you have the wrong kid. You have the wrong house, and then Vargas showed him the photographs from the Projects folder. Marco Reyes, who worked nights to give his family something good, who coached soccer with a bad back, who had never in his life been inside a police station, put his face in his hands and didn't come back up for a long time. Diane Reyes was called next. She came in still wearing the sweater she'd had on when she put the kids to bed. Sophia was asleep. Daniel was asleep. The house was quiet. She said later, I remember thinking I needed to get back before they woke up. I remember thinking I'd left the porch light on. She never went back that night. Daniel's formal interview is one of the most documented and most disturbing on record in the state of Florida. He sat across from Detective Vargas and a child psychologist named Dr. Elaine Cho, who had been specially called in. He was offered juice and crackers because he was 12, and because that is still the law. He was still a child, and he was still entitled to the small dignities of childhood even then. He drank the juice. He answered every question. He didn't confess reluctantly. He didn't break down. He didn't seem frightened, or relieved, or trapped. He explained, methodically, calmly, with the same spatial awareness his soccer coach had admired. When Dr. Cho asked him if he understood that Victor, Angela, and Marcus were gone, that they were dead, he said, "Yes, I understood that was the outcome." When she asked him how that made him feel, he was quiet for a moment. And then he said, "I'm not sure I have the right word for it." Dr. Cho later wrote in her evaluation, "The subject does not appear to experience affect in the way that is typical for his developmental stage, or indeed for any stage. This is not suppression. This is not trauma response. This is an absence. An absence. At 12 years old, I want to spend some time here, trackers, because this is the part of the case that I wrestled with the most. The word that gets thrown around in cases like Daniel's is psychopath. It's an easy word. It's a scary word. It does a lot of social work. It puts someone on the other side of a clear line from us, marks them as fundamentally other, and lets us go to bed feeling like it could never be our family. I'm not going to use that word. Not because it may not be clinically appropriate. Dr. Cho's evaluation contained language that implies significant psychopathic trait, but because that word, as we use it in casual conversation, ends the inquiry. And I am not here to end inquiries. I'm here to follow them. So let's follow this one. What the clinical team found, over months of evaluation, was this. Daniel had been showing signs since early childhood. Signs that were either not recognized or recognized and filed away under phrases like phase, and boys will be boys, and he's just intense. He had dissected a bird at age 7. not with childlike curiosity with what his sister Sophia later described, haltingly, as focus. Like it was homework. He had, at age 9, kept a journal of his own separate from his mother's that detailed, in dispassionate language, his observations of the people around him. Not feelings, observations, patterns of movement, routines, vulnerabilities. At 10, he had gotten into a fight at school and, when the other child cried, had leaned in close and watched with what a teacher described as clinical interest. Each of these moments had been reported to a school counselor, to a pediatrician, to Diane's mother, who had said over the phone, *, he sounds like his grandfather. Very serious boy. *, the system, the complex, overwhelmed, under-resourced system, had not connected the dots. The parents loving, exhausted, working, hoping had not connected the dots. And in the space between the dots, something had been building. Quietly, patiently, with excellent spatial awareness. Here is what I believe, trackers, and you are welcome to disagree with me. Daniel was not a monster who appeared from nowhere. He was a child with a brain that worked in a way that required intervention-intensive, specialized, early intervention that he never received. That is not an excuse. It is a cause. And causes matter not because they absolve, but because they instruct. 3 people are dead because of Daniel's choices. 3 families are in permanent, irreversible grief. That is the immovable truth at the center of this case, and nothing that follows it changes it. But somewhere right now, in some other quiet suburb in a homeowners association neighborhood with a community pool and a lost cat Facebook group, there is another child. Sitting still, taking notes with their eyes. And the question this case demands we ask is not *, how do we explain Daniel? *, the question is, *, are we paying enough attention? *, Daniel was adjudicated through the juvenile court system in Florida. Due to his age and the findings of Dr. Cho's evaluation, he was remanded to a long-term juvenile psychiatric facility. Under Florida law, his name, records, and case details are sealed. He will not age out of the system until adulthood, at which point a separate judicial review will determine his trajectory. Marco and Diane Reyes separated 8 months after the arrest. Diane has spoken publicly once a single statement, released through an attorney in which she said, *, I grieve for the families of the victims every day. I grieve for my own family every day. I do not know how to hold all of it. I am trying. *, Sophia Reyes transferred schools. She is, by all accounts, continuing to study marine biology. She wants to study sharks. Renee Alanis, Victor's daughter in Atlanta, started a foundation in her father's name that funds community garden projects in underserved neighborhood. Terrence, Angela's boyfriend, donated the engagement ring to a local resale charity shop after 6 months. He said in an interview, *, she would have wanted someone to have it who was excited about it. *, Darnell and Camille Webb, Marcus's parents, have become the loudest and most tireless advocates for early mental health screening in Florida's public schools. Darnell said, *, I'm not interested in sympathy. I'm interested in change. Marcus deserves change. *, Marcus deserves change. I'll carry that one with me for a while. This one was heavy, trackers. I won't pretend otherwise. Victor Alanis tended his garden with the patience of someone who believed that beautiful things were worth the effort. Angela Moss wanted to help people find their way back. Marcus Webb had braces he was going to get off in April. Remember them. If this episode stirred something in you, if you recognize something in the early signs we talked about tonight, in yourself or in someone you know, I've linked resources in the description. The Child Mind Institute, the National Alliance on Mental Illness, early intervention resources in Florida and beyond. There is no such thing as too early to ask the question. Until next time, trackers, stay curious, stay compassionate, stay watching, because every disappearance leaves a clue, every clue tells a story, and every story deserves the truth.